So who would like to start off asking the first question? Yes, ma'am.
How can the profitability be any different from that rate of return?
So first off, the return is not guaranteed. We have an opportunity to earn. What that means is that there is a calculation that goes into the cost of service that determines here's the revenue requirement, and then you try and marry that up with these are what we believe are the billing determinants, which means how many kilowatt hours are going to be consumed, what's the peak demand that somebody's going to have, and you try and set your rates based off of that.
So the rate of return is made up of a return on equity, which is usually in the neighborhood of 10%. There'll be a huge argument down at the commission where it should be, but I don't expect it to go below 9.5. I would be shocked if they get it below 9. That's a lot of return on equity if you know anything about investing. I mean, you know what you're getting on your savings account. I saw a bank advertising the other day, you'll get a whole 1% on your savings, you know. And then it's their cost of debt, which in the last rate case was in the neighborhood of 6%. I didn't check these numbers today. So they got 6% for cost of debt, 10% for cost of equity. Figure out the capital structure of the company, and it usually ends up so that it's around 8% weighted average cost of capital. And I think a lot of us would argue that it's time it's not back in the 1960s anymore. And we need new technologies, we need competition, and we don't need to be paying our utilities 10% return on their equity.
And to transition us to energy that's free of carbon pollution. And how do you justify that to yourself?
So I'm not familiar with the exact study that you mentioned, the IPCC study, but I know there are a lot of reports around saying that these things are happening, and I'll trust the facts that you laid out. What I would say is that there's a transition we have to go through. So just like the baloney that she was talking about in the stranded asset, if we were to get rid of all of this at one point in time, at the exact same point in time, it's going to cost a lot. So we have to take into account what was being said at the back of the room. How do you do this in a phased manner that makes sense? So Colorado, the state of Colorado, the General Assembly had the wisdom to go through and what they did in 2010 and put in place and said it makes more sense for us to proactively do this and put together our plan under our time frame than it does to have something all of a sudden come down on us later. And how do we do that? And so we're making steps in that direction. Says a lot about the progress that we've made in this past decade on all the investment in the renewables. Being the leader that we are in wind energy, we have made significant progress on addressing those very things that you're quoting. And we continue to look at opportunities to do so. We have to balance that with the costs. It's the only prudent way for us to move forward in looking at how do you make those investments and make sure our costs to our customers don't go through the roof.
I absolutely agree with Alice that we can't retire all the coal plants like tomorrow or even next year. The question is, how fast can we do it? And I would argue that we can do it a lot faster than Xcel's current plan. You can phase out coal plants and you can mothball them and you can do lots of different things, and I'm all about that. But we need a plan, and one of the reasons I'm so excited is because I think Alice can help us get there. And we will have an opportunity in 2015 in the next resource plan. I've long argued for a phase out where you reduce, instead of making your coal plants operate 80 to 90% of the time, you specifically say we're going to have a capacity factor on our coal plants next year of 60%. We're gonna shut them down during some of the shoulder months when our wind is going fabulously well, and we're going to start learning how to operate this system without coal plants. And I'll just finish up. As part of the Boulder discussions, Xcel sent this graph to the city, so Alice can see it, showing how their carbon reductions were coming down. And we're glad they're going down and not up. But as part of the discussion, as we think about the imperative addressing climate, it seems to me we could be aiming for a 2020 to 2030 time frame instead of like, well, we'll kind of dribble off and by 2050 we'll be somewhere. 2050 is a long time, and I'm especially looking at the young people. So we sort of graded it and said, well, Xcel's here in the C minus B plus range. We'd like to see them accelerate that into the 2020, 2030 time frame, and then they'll be working in the A and B range. And if they were to come up with a plan, by 2020, well, that's A plus for sure. But 2030 is very doable. But as it is now, they don't expect to retire, phase out, mothball, whatever you want to call it, a coal plant until 2030, and the last one until 2069. That's really why we're not happy. That's what we got to address, and we will.
I wonder, I mean, I think Chris was getting to, if you look at your goals,
What I can tell you is that we know it's an interest of our customer base, and it's something that we talk about internally. We don't have any final plans or grand answer to what that might be. And the overarching layer is what's going to be the rate impact. If there's a appetite for a higher rate impact to achieve those kinds of things, that might be something we consider in the future. We just don't have a good plan at this point in time on how exactly you would do that.
If you were interested in dialoguing with Xcel, how does that work? Is either of you?
So there's always public comment. Anytime we have a docket filed before the commission, you can submit a written comment and it will show up in the docket. The commissioners do read them. At least we hear a lot about them reading them. And so there's always a way and an avenue for people to comment. Leslie, would you characterize it any differently?
If you want to try to intervene in a formal way, you go out and hire a PUC attorney, $400 an hour, about, for a not very good one. So yeah, you can go down and talk into the microphones that aren't connected to anything. We've done a lot of that in this community. We turned out hundreds of people. And then in the resource plan, two things to consider is that recently Xcel's been using a cost of zero for cost of carbon. Mm-hmm. And we don't know, we can argue over what the cost of carbon is, but we can be absolutely sure it isn't zero. So I'm really hoping that the company will start to recognize that there's costs that we pay. When I paid for my basement to be redone and I got off easy here in Boulder, you would have had to double my utility bill for the next decade to even come close to making up for what it cost me. And I'm looking at somebody in the audience who had it much worse than I did. So there's real costs, we just don't pay them on our utility bill, so we should start incorporating that in our thinking. The other thing I'm going to do very quickly, but it's really, 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 really important, and there's somebody in the room who really, really understands this. But when Xcel does their resource plans, they discount their future fuel costs. They say, well, if we burn coal, we're going to discount our fuel costs, and we're going to cut them in half for every year, every decade that we look out. So if they do a resource plan that goes out 4 decades, for the first decade they discount their fuel, it's a half. Then I'll shut up in a second. Second decade, their fuel costs look like a quarter. Third decade, their fuel costs look like an eighth. And after 4 decades, their fuel costs look like a 16th of what they're likely to be, because they discount them at their weighted average cost of capital. And you're shaking your heads and not believing it, because it's really wild. And it's absolutely true, and we've confirmed it in Discovery a whole bunch. And so we got to get both those two things fixed, so that when we do our resource plans, we're not assuming the cost of carbon is zero, and we're not discounting future fuel costs, because the young folks in the audience are going to pay the real cost, which Xcel passes through. They're not going to pay the discounted cost. And so those are two big things we need to get fixed.
I think in response to the discussion is, I'm not familiar with the discounting of our fuel in any of our ERPs. When I've looked at the cost curves, I see them go into the future at whatever the long-term forecast has been.
We've confirmed it in Discovery many times.
So that's
we
will
say,
be something.
do you discount your future fuel costs at the weighted average cost of capital? I ask them in Discovery, and the answer comes back, yes, we discounted at the weighted average cost of capital of 7.6%. I didn't bring all of that tonight, but I can absolutely show it to you.
No, and I can go back, and since I have the lovely regulatory group at my disposal,
I
can
think you
ask
could
those
ask them.
questions.
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah.
So you would do that.
Yeah, and so that's something that I want to understand a little bit better. The other thing I would say is that, I don't have all the numbers on the coal costs as far as what's been going on over the past several years, but I do know that when we came in 2010 and we projected what the cost would be for our coal plants and the dollar per MMBTU rate in these next years as we're ramping out of a number of those, it was higher than what our actual experience is. And then, so that's the good news for customers, because fuel is a straight pass-through. It's not something we get any profit on. There's no markup on it. It's a straight pass-through. The reason in the last ERP that we had that the cost of carbon was included at zero is because at that point in time, and right now, we don't have a cost that's imposed on us. There's not emissions credits that we have to buy to offset CO2. And so it's difficult for us to include costs that aren't realities. We know they may be coming. Figuring out how to give value to those is something that we take into consideration very carefully. And as we both know, we have pending rules from the EPA that we are all addressing and looking at how to resolve.
The thing about the discount rate that's so important is when you discount future fuel costs, you're comparing renewable resources that don't have any fuel costs. The sun's going to be 0, 20 and 30 and 40 years from now, the fuel, against fossil fuels, which are very likely to be increasing. We can argue, are they going to increase 2% a year, 6%, 7%? That makes a really big difference as you go out several decades. But if you discount those future fuel costs, then you make it look like your fossil resources really aren't going to have fuel costs, because when they're coming in at a 16th of what they are likely to be, it's de minimis. It's like pennies on the dollar. And so what we might anticipate is $1,000 in fuel costs in the year 2044 shows up in Xcel's present value revenue requirement program as $125. And that doesn't make sense. And that's part of what we need to get fixed. Because once we get the discount rate below 4%, you build renewables like nobody's business. We did it all. We used all your data from the resource plan. And it was like just transformed what your company would do.
We need to evaluate what is the cost to the customer over the lifespan of the resources that we're making decisions about. And how do you do that comparison between a renewable resource versus a fossil fuel-based resource? They both have benefits, they both have values, they have certain characteristics we have to operate around. So one of the things I would say is I'm interested is if you would agree with me, in the last electric resource plan, we came out with significant wind that we added in, and we came out with significant solar that's being added to the system right now.
Significant.
Solar that's being added to the system. There's been a lot of progress in getting those things in, and we were very encouraged by the bids that came in on those as far as the dropping prices, and those things came in economically compared to other resources, and so we were happy to add them to the system and move on. Would you agree that that was a good outcome from that ERP?
It was fabulous. We were all beyond thrilled, right? We're thrilled that this green swath is so large. But we call it a green veneer over a fossil fuel-based system, and what we're looking for is the movement that moves us to a renewable energy-dominated system. And we're happy when this gets bigger, but we're not really addressing climate change until we see a much steeper decline in the largest sources of greenhouse gas.
renewable energy with natural gas.
Please.
As far as the fracking component goes, I can't answer exactly how that's been equated into this. We don't ask for cost recovery of, through any of our rates for those types of things. Now, there are many, many debates out there about fracking. I'm not the person that's an expert on those items that could give you a clear answer on which one is accurate or which one is not. But there is significant debate in our state about those things right now, about how those are going, and it's an evolving infrastructure that will be watched over time. So I think that's probably an area that we'll all be learning about a lot in the next several years. But right now, natural gas is something that we have to use in order to be able to provide the reliability that's necessary for the system.
So I'm absolutely in support of your concern. I am praying that the Commission will begin to incorporate some of these external costs into their decision making one way or another. I think we have the right person to help us, so I'm very excited about that. The only thing I would say is that Cherokee is that North Denver coal plant. Now, don't throw rotten tomatoes. I support the transition of Cherokee from coal to natural gas, not because I love natural gas, but because it was the heart of Xcel's system in Denver. Without that, they have 17 different transmission lines coming out of there. They needed to have capacity in that location. Now, our job is to have that capacity there and not use it as much as we possibly can. But I would never advocate for a solution that requires turning the lights off in Denver, either for a short period of time or a long period of time, because it won't move us forward, it'll move us backwards.
Did you want to start? You want me to go?
Why don't you go
Okay. Really what I have to say is, thank you. I appreciate the invite to be able to come out and engage. I appreciate the questions and the insightful comments. It's good to know people are out there watching this stuff. I can tell you this, after being in the industry as long as I have, a couple of years in, my husband and I were having a conversation one night after we got home from work, and I was telling him about my day, and I was so excited about some new tariffs that I'd been working on and what was going on. And he goes, stop. I said, what's up? And he looked at me and he said, you know, from now on, let's just go with, was it a good day or was it a bad day? Because you've been talking for like 10, 15 minutes and you've used so many acronyms, I don't know what language you're talking about. So it's really encouraging to know that people are out there watching this stuff, trying to understand it, asking the questions. Don't stop asking the questions. We appreciate the opportunity to talk. I think it's a learning experience, hopefully, on your side as well as mine. It has been for me. And we'll continue to see what we can talk about.
Absolutely. It really has been a historic night. I think we've got a new chapter, and I've seen this happen a lot in Xcel, and they do hire really good people. And it is why they break records in wind, and why they have a lot of solar, and why we see them. And we need to develop the expertise running the system and keeping our state powered and then our country powered without the coal plants, because they need coal to operate, and we don't have that 200-year supply of coal. The mines are playing out very quickly. I've written extensive reports that are thoroughly documented. These are the earnings for the top 3 coal companies for the last couple of years, and you see a lot more red than you see black. And it's not really about regulation, because the regulations haven't gone into effect yet. It's because the mines are playing out. Production costs are above their sales costs. They're producing coal for this much and selling it for this much. And when you do that, you lose a lot of money. And we've documented all this out of their 10Ks. And that means that the utility industry shouldn't assume that when they pour money into coal plants, the coal will then show up. It doesn't fall out of the sky. It has to come out of mines. And so I'm praying that we can help our country understand this and once again have Xcel demonstrate how to move into the 21st century. The company's done it time and again. They complain royally, and then they do it, and they do a fabulous job. And I look very much look forward to seeing that happen once again. So thank you.